Thank you all for joining us today. To start, firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land where I am today, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm Paul Cheel, and I'm thrilled to host this session on behalf of the PRIA Education Community Committee. Today's webinar is titled Mindful Communication for Impact. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today, Victoria Erskine. Victoria, many of you will already know, but is a strategic communications lecturer at Charles Sturt University School of Information and Communication Studies. She has over 25 years, sorry, I'm putting an extra 10 years on you there, Victoria, 25 years of professional practice experience in media and communication industry, both as a consultant and in-house. Her PhD focuses on how to build better stakeholder relationships and enhance impact through strategic communication in complex stakeholder environments and exploring building resilience in professional practice. She is passionate about raising awareness of and solutions for mental wellness. Last year, Victoria and I hosted a webinar discussing the collective responsibility of PR industry leaders and academics to nurture well-being in the communication industry. There can be no doubting that the communication profession can be stressful, and there's no shortage of alarming data out there about the challenges practitioners are facing. What we heard in that webinar was that this is also an important topic for many of you across the profession. And today, Victoria is going to take this discussion even further, discussing how communication professionals can lead the charge for what she calls a kindness revolution, building a reputation for skills that are fundamental in a rapidly changing world, such as kindness, compassion, and gratitude. Victoria, I'm very much looking forward to hearing your presentation. These are often phrases and words we don't hear in practice and often seen as soft skills, but actually I think there's probably some of the hardest to master. So I'll pass over to you and look forward to hearing about how we can implement some of these skills in practice and the benefits that would bring.
Thank you, Paul. I'm just going to share my screen. So just go back to this one. Oops, wrong screen. Stop sharing. Oh, no, there we are. Good. Good to go. Ready to go. You can see that. Thank you so much for that introduction. That's very kind. Yeah, so a little bit, you've had a little bit of a background about my professional and personal background. I want to hopefully open up a comfortable space here where people can share their own experiences of building resilience or challenges they've faced in their profession today. So please feel free to jump into the chat or pop any comments along the way that you might like to add. There's a little activity that you might feel like to add into this chat as well as we go. So thank you for coming today. Firstly, I would like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I come to you today from, which is the Gundungurra and Darug people. And I'm coming to you from the Blue Mountains in New South Wales. So how I wanted to frame or start this conversation with you is thinking about how we approach the work that we do as professional communicators. So probably many of us will relate very much to the image on the left of your screen there, having this busy head all of the time. And we're moving towards thinking about skills that can develop us as our abilities to really have more clarity in what we do as communication professionals, and hopefully meaning that we can be better at the jobs that we do, that we are performing for ourselves, not only within ourselves, but also for our clients and communities that we represent. A quick snapshot of my crazy life. What I wanted to really explain to people in this context is, yes, I've had a really exciting and wonderful career as a communication professional and now as an academic, where I get to share knowledge and learn from the amazing students that I teach at Charles Sturt University and that I engage with, and my colleagues in the School of Communication. But I'm also a human, and I bring a very human approach to communication. I hope that's one of my strengths. And I remember early in my career feeling quite vulnerable about that humanness that I brought to my job, and feeling that it was potentially a little bit of a weak point. And I guess what I've developed over the years is a capacity to embrace that vulnerability, but also to accept that I'm all of these things when I turn up to do my job as a communication in the years that I was managing teams in communication, and also as an academic and leading the next generation, that we're all made up of all these different complex levels. And it's time that we sort of embrace our own story as part of how we learn to build that mental strength to become even better at what we do in our jobs. So looking at, I just wanted to quickly give you a snapshot of what my dining tables look like over the last couple of weeks. So about 2015, just as a quick bio story, I had been practicing as a professional communicator for around 20 odd years. And I had started to have some health concerns. And one of those concerns turned out to be a neurological condition that it came into my life. But in the process of working a really stressful job, raising small children, and just juggling all the things, I started to think about what I could put in place to help me manage this complex life. So I started to explore, as I had done for a number of years, the practices of meditation. So I've been meditating regularly for about 15 years, although on and off. And then I started to really think about and be curious about the science behind meditation, because what I had noticed within myself was this shift. So when I turned up to work and was approaching the challenges of managing a team, of working with some high profile political actors, and running a sort of multimedia environment, I realized that the days that I meditated I felt quite different to when the days I hadn't been able to do that practice. And there was something in me that shifted. So I started to delve into the science to try and find out a little bit more about what was going on in me. At the same time, as a practitioner, at this time, noticing how much technology was overwhelming and impacting on every element of our lives, but especially on the skill set of communication professionals. So started to think about grabbing a new set of skills to help enhance my professional capabilities into the future. So the focus today is really about shifting a mindset to build a skill set. So looking at a bit of a case for building mindful practice into professional development, but also I'm going to showcase for you a little sample of some work we're doing with students on the capacity that might be relevant in terms of professional practice to building that skill set in mindful communication to boost what are already superpowers that we have as communication professionals in relationship management, in meaning and sense making, and in being those professionals that really set the agenda and the dialogue that is going on in the world around us, in society. And maybe we'd like to think about if we can even measure kindness and compassion in professional communication. We've talked a lot about measurement. We've talked a lot about data. So maybe it's time to start thinking about maybe measuring our kindness and compassion as a real embedded value of our profession. So to put my money where my mouth is, I'm going to start right now with a little meditation practice just to get everybody's centered into the room. And I hope you appreciate this. You may participate or not. This is optional, but I hope you enjoy.
So sitting comfortably, just beginning with a nice big deep breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. So eyes open, a soft focus. As you breathe out, you can allow the breath to return to its natural rhythm. But just keep the eyes open for a moment. Just focusing in on one particular object within your field of vision. Not staring at it too intently, still aware of the space around you. But just gently focusing on that one object. And then just slowly zooming back out again as you blink a few times with the eyes.
Great. Thank you, Headspace, for that mini meditation. So we're also I'm going to ask you if you would like to participate in a bit of an experiment this afternoon. This could get awkward, but I'm going to go with it anyway. To start with, one of our foundations of the practice of becoming more mindful around our communication is thinking about the things we might be grateful for. So as a little exercise, and this is an activity that I have built into a subject I teach called Building Your Professional Profile for first-year communicators, I'm going to ask you to do a quick jot down or memory bank, 3 things that you're grateful for. Go. You may put it in the chat if you feel that way inclined, or just think about it for yourself. But right here, right now, 3 things that you might be grateful for right here. I won't labour on for that for too long, but I will also present you the opportunity to think about that during our presentation. 3 things I'm grateful for right now: my amazing coffee from the barista at my local Blackheath delicatessen, the opportunity to share this presentation with my colleagues and friends today, and also thinking about just being able to work in the way we do and actually have the opportunity to be from home, looking after my son who's sick today, and sharing this professional presentation with you. So there's 3 things that I'm grateful for right now. So to take that a step further and apply that or spread that gratitude, I'd like you to think about just taking a brief breath, just a small pause. Feel the breath in the body, wherever it is. It might be through the nose, it might be through the belly, might be in the chest. Now, if you could imagine that breath could travel, and maybe it would be delivering one kind thought to someone in your life. Maybe it's a co-worker, maybe it's a client, maybe it's a member of your target audience or a stakeholder that you're engaging with in a campaign that's really front of your mind. Just as an example, what could that breath say? What would that breath say if it was a kind message being delivered out into the world? Again, this is something that you can do in your own time, but I wanted to place those little activities there as examples of how we operationalize these skills and attitudes and values with our students in our exploration of what it means to be a communication professional. I just want to say, so far, this kind of activity is going pretty well in class. We're up to week 6 nearly. So the first week, there was a few weeks, a bit of resistance, but I think there's an expectation now that this kind of activity will become part of our weekly learning, and the students are certainly settling in and being a bit more comfortable with it. But that's okay. I'm all right. I'm totally fine being awkward. That's part of comes with the territory sometimes in bringing new things in. So let's get to some definitions. What is mindful communication? We often think about this in terms of interpersonal communication skills. So for psychologists and teachers and people working in the profession, mindful communication is an interpersonal skill. But technically, it's thinking about attributes like focused attention and that present awareness that we've just practiced through our meditation just now. Active listening, which is a little hard to do in a webinar, but I wanted to acknowledge that is obviously a key skill. It's being in touch with the senses, so how your body is feeling at any point in time. So noticing reactions that are happening to things going on around you, and also what's happening in your own body. Or it might be sights, sounds, and smells, all the things that are happening in your immediate environment. It's being able to acknowledge the emotions that those feelings are delivering and acknowledging them as being there. It's also paying attention to the actions, to your actions and responses in others. So using tools like Johari windows and other activities to really think about how are you actually sending the messages that you hope to be sending to the people around you, and how are you responding to the messages they're sending you? It's about, therefore, being reflective, not just knowing what to do in any given circumstance, but thinking about why and how you got there, and maybe how you could do better next time. And most importantly, it's really about personal accountability. So being mindful of your communication in every sense is understanding that you have a responsibility to others and to yourself to uphold the best kind of practices you can. So what this program today is really thinking about is bringing what we know, what is scientifically being proven by psychologists, and in a huge growth area of positive psychology, as well as contemplative practices, such as where the foundations of meditation come from, and using a combination of those learnings, all that research and data that's out there, and thinking about how we could translate that into a professional skill set. So it starts with self-awareness. And one of my gurus in this space, and someone I've been following for a number of years, is a former American journalist called Dan Harris, who many of you will know, was an anchor on ABC News and a foreign correspondent who had a very public panic attack on live TV, and then dove into this whole area of meditation as a way of rebuilding his own and understanding his own emotional responses. And in that journey, he discovered a whole lot of things, but what he has done is create, I suppose, a learning platform called 10% Happier, which I subscribe to and follow. And there's a lot of really trying to spread the message of helping people understand how they can stop being hijacked by their emotions and move into a more present and mindful state of being. Really, that's kind of the premise. So it's really about using these tools to become more aware, so you're less susceptible to being dragged down into unhelpful thinking by your emotions. So the focus for how we've approached this, or how I'm approaching it in terms of the professional context today, but how we approach with building this capacity in our students, is thinking about interpersonal skill, a couple of pillars, so interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence. Now, we often see emotional intelligence sort of wrapped under the list of interpersonal skills. I've separated it out specifically because I think there's very specific skill sets and tactics and tools under each of these pillars that help us lead to being more mindful with our communication. So it's about our capacity to develop the interpersonal skills and our capacity to develop and acknowledge the emotional intelligence we required to be the best version of ourselves we can be, and therefore valuing these skill sets to operate in this increasingly fractured world. So for some context in terms of how I suppose what's going on in the world is the next place. So with the work I've done over a number of years looking at resilience in communication professionals, but also with our students, no surprise to anyone, the massive increase in anxiety and mental health challenges in our young people is equally mirrored in what's going on in communication professionals. And this report by the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence, most recent snapshot, so a post-COVID, if we can call that where we are, an ongoing COVID world. When you look at that word cloud and examining the experiences of the communication professionals surveyed for that study, it is pretty obvious that there's a lot of things going on, and a lot of people are still very concerned or anxious and stressed, that there's this point of indifference, or that others don't really care, and this about well-being is also a little bit disconcerting, even though there's a lot of work being done in capacity. And I think what this study really mirrored, what I'm seeing in the classroom and what I'm seeing from my students' experiences, is a general sense of overwhelm, a general sense of how do we know what's coming next, and how do we prepare for that, at the same time really investing in themselves to build the skills as communication professionals to enter into whatever that world might be. So I thought that was a really interesting snapshot, because it very much mirrored what I'm seeing students and happening in students. And we know from our work on issues in crisis management that these feelings are not dissimilar or not unfamiliar to any of us at any stage in our career. I would have said the same thing 15 or 20 years ago in my professional role. What's shifted and what's changed is we now have some language and some conversations around preserving mental health, and in fact working really collectively to help build a strength in the mental wellness of our profession. And this is a mental health and wellbeing story, but that's just one part of it. I just wanted to flick to the next contextual piece. So it feels right now, I think when this report from Edelman, the latest trust barometer, came down in the last few months, I personally found it very sobering reading. And I think that many of us did, although we felt intrinsically that there was this rise in distrust, to actually see it documented in this the distrust, or the trust 10, which is just an excerpt from the detailed Edelman report, was enough to cause some concern for everybody who was reading it. I won't say it's hopeless, but it's certainly, because that's definitely not the intention of what we're talking about here today, but it does give us pause to consider, how do we operate in a world where the top issue people surveyed in this report, in this study, found was that distrust in society is now society's default emotion. So to think that we're working and living and operating in a world where the default tendency is to distrust rather than trust people really is counterintuitive to the way we work as communication professionals, which is all about building trust and engaging in meaningful conversations and creating meaningful exchanges between our audiences and the organizations that we work for, and really doing things in a positive way for the world. So the fact that people think they're incapable of having constructive and civil debates about issues, not only with themselves, but with friends and family and neighbours, does make us think about what tools we might have to dig deep to find to manage the reality of this world. And the one, I guess the one positive, or one of the many positives, is that we're thinking about moving forward. What this data really shows us is, while there are certainly problems in government and media sources, and there are still those in business, I guess it's an opportunity for us as professionals who operate not just in the business, but broadly in any kind in business, but in a range of institutions, that there is an opportunity to reevaluate how we communicate and how we might be part of those conversations to help restore trust as employees and as employers of young people in a diverse population. The other research that I'm drawn to at this time of year is the Fred Cook and the gang at University of Southern California's Annenberg Center for Public Relations, and their most recent relevance report shows that basically, while 60% of consumers think that corporations should be signing up to support causes that are happening, social causes, and they're willing to pay that extra, for some of them are willing to pay extra to actually buy products and services that deliver on that commitment, it also puts the onus of responsibility back on organisations to be able to navigate the complexity of the difficult conversations or conflict that inevitably surround those big issues. So it is, again, coming back to, how do businesses and organisations make their brand visible to support the very causes that their consumers and their audiences and their stakeholders want them to, whilst maintaining the respect and engaging in civil conversations and understanding how the polarization within society has actually, increased that divide. So the chasm in the middle that we try to operate in to bring people together is much deeper than it has been for a long time. So again, it causes me to reflect on, how do I prepare my students to operate in that environment when I know this is the challenge ahead of them? So is it about less shouting, more listening, less talking at people, more collaboration, less busy, more pause? Is it about slowing down? Do we have the opportunity of a unique position to make a difference in the tea room, in the boardroom, in the press calls, on social media, in the town halls? This is the kind of thinking that I want to place in your minds this afternoon. In another bit of evidence from Annenberg, there was also this concept that in a separate study, but reported in the relevance report, was that this is not easy work. This is actually really challenging and difficult work because of the increasing alienation from not only outside of organizations, but within teams themselves. So thinking about your workplace and how you have difficult conversations with colleagues about big issues, you really need specific and really highly tuned interpersonal and emotional intelligence skills to be able to navigate the minefield of how to have a conversation about entering a climate change debate. Do we mount a campaign about Black Lives Matter and Me Too? What would that look like for our organisation, and what can we expect to happen when those messages are out in the public arena and technically out of our control? So it's really something we have to keep constantly reflecting on. And I'll just flick through this next one, but essentially it's really interesting in the Edelman report to think about what's actually driving that polarization that we've seen across society, and this is across the world. Australia is at the moment bordering on the in danger of severe polarization category, which I don't know whether is something we should be celebrating or holding our breath on. And I think there was certainly a comment in the Mentally Healthy report that from the strategic Centre for Strategic Communication, which said, from somebody in that report, there was a quote that said, "I'm really glad at least I don't live in America." And again, that's just there but the grace of God kind of thinking, because inevitably we're a global society. So what's happening in America, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in Asia is no doubtedly interacting or influencing what's happening in Australian context without doubt. I only have to listen to the conversations in my classroom, and most of them are generated by what's going on TikTok. 100%. So when I ask students to respond to issues, or we have a chat about things that are happening in the world, that's inevitably, and we drill down on where that information comes from, most of it's coming from TikTok. So we really, and that's no news to anyone in this webinar. So it's interesting that it's everywhere really, but that this distrust in government, this lack of shared identity, this us and them, this systemic unfairness. I noticed posts on social media after the election from some people actually related to me, commenting about, it's time to throw out the voting, Australia's voting system, because the outcome wasn't the one that they were looking for. So these kind of narratives are so out there, and really something that we all need to be bracing ourselves to manage. Another interesting report from Cefiani, who many of you, I don't know if anyone from Cefiani is on the call today, but obviously a leader in communications agency in Australia, and their report their most recent report about the industry, or snapshot, really demonstrate or further adds to this conversation that we're dealing with a generation that is actually starting to shift from where things have been, and where the industry that's being managed by perhaps more of the Gen X population as opposed to the Gen Z really needs to shift gear pretty quickly to keep up with that. So the younger generations coming through are moving a little bit away from turning away, as the report states, from me into this we. They're looking for more opportunities to buy ethical brands, to engage in meaningful conversations, to participate in social enterprises, but at the same time in an environment that is increasingly perhaps pulling people apart. So to make an impact, brands obviously have this challenge, and building reputation in this climate is a really challenging thing. And there's some great case studies in that report. So if you haven't read it, I encourage you to have a look at it. So thank you to Cefiani for pulling that together. There's some great tips about what does it mean. And it just means that, that really with that increased fragmentation, culture on the inside of organizations is never been more important than it has been, because the line between internal and external is long past. But we need to be more authentic in demonstrating, practicing what we preach in terms of brand authenticity to get the audiences buy-in and engagement that we want for our businesses. So I think just a couple of examples that have most recently hit the headlines, and there's 1,000 million more you could be grabbing. But I just wanted to reflect on for a moment that even watching coverage about these exact issues we're talking about requires a great deal of emotional regulation. So there's a lot of negative discourse going on. This particular case or example I brought here was coverage of an issue that erupted in Alice Springs in terms of the community's response to some challenging behaviours and disruption in the community. That was one issue. And the second issue was the media coverage of that particular meeting. And the third issue was some commentary around an expert in that area who was an apparent nurse in who had worked, or a health worker who'd worked in Alice Springs, who became who got a lot of media coverage for her story, and you can see her there interviewed by Peter Credlin. But what this really pointed out was that although this the coverage of this meeting was called into question, so ABC's coverage, these are snapshots from Media Watch a couple of weeks ago that demonstrate the analysis that went into this issue, because what it really demonstrated is that the discourse that's going on increases. Actually, the discourse around this story actually celebrated polarization, and it was not civil commentary. And so on either side, the presumption of the ABC journalist that it was a disruptive event didn't mirror the experiences of many of the people that had attended that meeting. So there's all these conflicting opinions coming out, and in the end, once it's out there, it's out there. And how do we manage the narratives and the spin-offs that actually take off with lightning speed after something like that breaks? However, as a moment of hope, I was encouraged on the weekend to watch Dominic Perrottet's conciliation speech, which we also discussed it in class with my students, who also found it incredibly inspiring. They were literally made it noted that it was something that they hadn't seen before, that it was a sign of a shift in some of the narratives that were taking place in the media about politics. And bearing in mind, this is a generation who's grown up in the last 10 years, 15 years of politically polarized Australian context, and lots of conflict and negative narratives going on. And so this was noticeably something different, which is a hopeful sign of things to come. So just a quick snapshot on where I guess where my research is going in the future, but also a little bit of what we know about how to build resilience in our profession. So given the context that we're dealing with, we know that resilience is a skill that can be nurtured and developed. We know that it looks like being determined, having some vitality and hope, some self-agency, that it is about maintaining composure. And this is the element of resilience that I'm focusing in on today. It is about having perseverance and the ability to just keep going even when things are tough. But having a general optimistic attitude, which, given the nature of what we've discussed already this afternoon, is a challenge in our environment, in society at the moment. And keeping going and having that endurance, being able to use all of the skills and tools available to you to invest in yourself and rebuild yourself so that you're in it for the long haul. So we're talking about practices today that hopefully build our capacity to be sustainable as communication professionals. A snapshot now of some of the skills that I'm sharing with my students about the future of where they're going. So we do a snapshot of what's happening in the industry. We do regular snaps of jobs in the market, but we also look to leading research around the world of work and try to place their communication skills in the context of the bigger picture of the world of work that they're entering. So in this particular study by McKinsey that looked at about 18,000 people were interviewed for this study in 15 countries. And it really so clearly spoke to me that these skills are all skills that we not only expect in our communication professionals, but we're practicing every day. So it has a range of layers, and there's 2 slides here, but essentially that even with the increase in AI and robotics that's taking hold in so many industries, At the center of our ability to actually operate in the profession, in any profession, but let's just focus on communication, is really these interpersonal and skills around what makes us human. And having stronger interpersonal and human skills actually makes us better cognitive thinkers as well. More importantly, it also helps us with this opportunity to have to build leadership. So building integrity, looking at how we be, the entrepreneurship and business skills, the courage, the energy, the passion, setting goals. And then, alongside that, we're building this digital fluency, this literacy, and being able to be adaptable to technology that's happening all around us, and also to be increasingly thinking of ways to digitize and improve the way we work. So this sort of matrix of skills is presented to students to consider where in an exercise, the values that they're identifying in their own sort of first semester, how those values fit into some of these skill sets as well. So what we want to think about is skill sets and mindsets and put them together. This is an interesting, I know this is something that's coming up and why I wanted to sort of put it on the agenda for as a PRIA member and as a member of the Education Community Committee, who has also participated in a number of accreditation reviews of other universities, and as well as doing one for my own, is that the skills matrix in which we operate currently have available to us. It's 2016, so it's we all know it's kind of ready for review. But when you look at the complexity of the skill level required, not only the skills, the knowledge, the skills, and the personal application to be in the communication profession, there's a lot going on. What I wanted to draw out from this, this is actually a mid-level, so a manager level position as described in our professional capability framework. And it is looking at things like negotiation skills, that this ability to clearly outline solutions to complex problem, that you're actually in charge of not only reviewing your own performance, but the performance of others. So you step in that managerial role, there's a whole lot of layers of skill sets that you need to be really sharp on to manage those teams effectively. So these competencies in this, in the professional framework really reflect at the time and still do, the synthesis of what's happening in agency and in-house roles, and essentially reflect, at the time it was written, the increasing importance of digital communication. I think we've gone beyond that even in the last, 7 or 8 years since this was finalised. And we're now moving into what I would consider the next generation of that skill set matrix or that framework, to be able to enhance these softer or interpersonal skills. So I'd like to see those skills enhanced in that matrix in the future. And when you look at, especially in a sample like this out of that framework, there's a lot of layers. What I'm looking at is, how do I teach these skills to my students, and what steps do we need to take to practice and embed things that make them really good listeners, that make them adaptable to technology, that help them with understanding how to communicate clearly with a diverse public, whilst working with a diverse team and finding solutions to business problems. There's a lot going on here, and it's a really, that's probably the point I'm trying to make in the next slide as well, is that the skill set that we require from communication professionals is so diverse and complex. So we don't want much. We've kind of got to be, there is a reality that the feeling from many people I speak with, and having practiced myself and still practicing, is that you often feel like you need to be everything to everyone. So aside from my academic role and my research, I lead communication for the Equally Well Project Australia, which is a small, very small project team in a multi-layered stakeholder group. And it is increasingly aware to me through that work that communication is this big umbrella that people really don't understand the complexity of, and but increasingly expect a lot of outputs, expect a lot of impact, and sometimes that requires a lot of difficult conversations about resourcing and about processes, about all kinds of creative discussions to actually produce the work that's expected. So in that environment, I'm asking or putting the question out there is, should we be looking at really what does it mean to be a good human as the foundation for building these skills? So this is our attempt at Charles Sturt in our building your professional capability subject, is that we have students building a self-care plan alongside building their career plan. So we want to build capability in our students to focus attention on self-care alongside self-development, career development, not because it's a nice thing to have on the side or not because, but because it's essential to practice, that it's equally as important. So each week we're building a self-care plan, and each week we're checking in on how to actually activate that. And this bit is generating some really interesting conversation about mind, body, and spirit. But again, that's part of the process. And I'm hoping people are feeling more comfortable with having those conversations, with doing things, activities like interviewing each other around a question like, what activities bring you joy? What helps you feel organized, energized? How do you feel at peace? What makes you feel fulfilled? And finding out how their peers are building coping strategies to deal with difficult moments in life. And all of that is scaffolded and supported in the classroom. Very much mindful of the fact that there are a lot of things going on in people's lives, and a lot of my students, no exception to that. So aware of the mental health reality, but not shying away from that, because we can all learn from those experiences. I've got some incredibly vulnerable and brave and courageous students in my class at the moment, and I want to acknowledge that, because it takes a lot of courage on their part to actually participate in this work. But I believe it's really helping them build that strength for when they get out into the workforce and perhaps the protections aren't there. Well, I hope they are. Anyway, that's what we're talking about. So back to our pillars, we're talking about these pillars of building interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence to reach that utopia of mindful communication. Maybe that's what it is. So mindfulness is the mindset we're shifting to. Meditation is a way to embed that skill of focused attention. So meditation and mindfulness, meditation, they can be quite confabulated, but essentially that's the way I'm framing it, and the way it's been framed by those that are in those fields. Meditation isn't for everyone, but there's lots of ways that you can do it. So I just wanted to sort of leave that caveat there. And asking my students to do these activities each week and focusing on meditation does challenge them. Bit of eye rolling. Often there's a lot of sleeping, which is fine by me. If you need a 5-minute kip, then that's what you need. An interesting one in the last week came up. I ask the students about their challenges and what they're facing in that week, and we focus a meditation practice supporting what their needs are first. So rather than me coming in and expecting, giving them something that that I think they need, I ask them and try to find something that works. So procrastination, anxiety about assessments, overwhelm in moving away from home was some of the themes that came out this week. So we worked on some activities to help support the students through those skills to manage their building of their communication skills with each other and their emotional responses to those. So this segues now into actually, more of the application part, which I hope is kind of bringing us to the culmination of any questions people might have. John Kabat-Zinn, many of you will know, is a leader in the stress-based mindfulness reduction movement. He's created a series of that psychologists use all over the world to help people with mental health challenges. But mindfulness is that moment-to-moment, non-judgment awareness, and how is that how that's being cultivated is being refined by your capacity to pay attention. It's that intentional focus and get in touch with what's happening around us and what's unfolding without necessarily falling into the trap of the emotional pull that those experiences are giving to us. In this, this is a sample of a meditation that I use quite frequently by Jeff Warren, who is co-wrote a book with Dan Harris, who I mentioned earlier, on meditation for fidgety skeptics. And I think this is a great landing or starting point for people thinking about whether meditation is for them, what will they get out of it anyway, Could it be of any use to you at work? What if I talked about it with people at work? What would that sound like? So he focuses, basically puts meditation, or describes it rather, as a tool, as the umbrella to help build these kind of skills, and concentration, focused attention, clarity, looking at the details of what's happening in any given experience, building up, reflecting or building a strength in a capacity for equanimity, which is one of my favorite words ever. Equanimity is that ability to notice what's going on, accept what's there, and let go of the judgment around it. When somebody in your office blows up because the urn in the tea room stops working, fair enough. How do you respond to that? Is it, oh, what a jerk, like everybody, just go to the coffee shop? Or do you let it pass, move on, and say to yourself, he's having a bad day? Okay, that's cool, let that and move on. So without kind of going into, without the judgment and the stories that go around things. Friendliness and enjoyment. As a lover of the positive movement, I guess, of bringing positive energy to work, in this meditation practice, we can think meditation can help us foster that being kind to yourself about what's happening. So those emotions that are coming up when you sit quietly and listen to your body and consider what's your thoughts, can often be very harmful or scary to some point, confronting. So just trying to open a friendly mind to that approach of what's coming up in meditation, and thinking about treating yourself a bit like a friend, having conversations with yourself that remind everything's going to be okay, using that kind of language, and not taking yourself too seriously. Ultimately, that meditation for me is, it's a contemplative task, but it's also one that I thoroughly enjoy and love to have fun with as well. So there are lots of benefits to using a mindful or meditation-based approach at work. Dr. Craig Hassard from the University of Melbourne has made international inroads into training medical students about how to use meditation, not only to relieve stress, but to improve focus and attention. Because literally, when you're anxious, you're missing things. And as doctors, that's something we don't want them to do. So there's lots of great examples of that kind of work happening across different spheres. And I think it's time to sort of turn our attention to the sphere we're in and see if some of those skills might be of value to us. So I'm well aware that even talking about meditation can be polarizing. So it's okay. That's, again, it's not an approach for everybody. It's one of the pillars, one of the skill builders that I'm focusing on today. In essence, a little bit goes a long way. That research from Professor Lindsay Cameron from Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Management, who teaches into the MBA course there, has done a lot of studies into meditation and meditative practices with Uber drivers, actually, with the gig economy world. And what she has discovered, or her and others in her school, is that it is improving not only emotional skills, but cognitive skills. So back to that framework of clarity and focused attention, they're the things you practice during meditation, which actually translate to improved cognitive abilities. That is especially beneficial in customer-facing work, or in our context, I would say client-facing work, anything where we're dealing with people that are not always we're not in control of, but we have to get on, have really great relationships with. And it builds on this concept of empathy, which I'll have a look, chat about in a second, but to help counteract the inherent biases in our system that we all carry with us. So just sort of speeding up to the last little bit, I wanted to, without speeding up, slowing it down, focus on these. We've talked about meditation. I want to look at gratitude as a practice that we could embed in how we work. So Hugh Van Keilenberg will be known to many of you as the founder of the Resilience Project. So his work is worth following up. His TED Talk is worth listening to. His podcast is terrific. So his focus and his work is on his three pillars are the GEM process, which is gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. Again, an approach where we're looking at savoring the good, at appreciating the small things, at building positive cultures wherever we go. And a lot of his work started in schools, but he's expanded exponentially with sporting clubs. I think there's over 1 million Australians from cricketers, netballers, soccer teams, AFL, NRL players, and business and industry aside, who've benefited from his work and are really starting to practice those skills of gratitude. But we apply it through the language that we have, the leadership we have, and we embed these skills. There's a list of things we could talk about there, which I'll leave for people to contemplate, but maybe it's time for PRIA to have a kindness award in our annual awards. The other pillar that I mentioned was about compassion. So this is having a view of the world that understands suffering is part of life, a natural part of life, but and with that knowing is wanting to do something about that, whether it's alleviating it within a small circle or contributing to a bigger issue, social issue. Equally, it's about trying to acknowledge suffering within yourself and think about ways you can alleviate that. So it's thinking about nurturing thoughts and actions, trying not to take things too personally, and thinking about perspectives outside of your own. And different to empathy, the notion of walking in others' shoes acknowledges that suffering exists. Compassion acknowledges that and thinks about what can I do to help alleviate that suffering or contribute to alleviating that pain and suffering that's happening in the world. So things like elevating lived experience in creative communication, very relevant in the field I'm working in, mental health. Building wisdom, so looking at looking around you for knowledge owners and knowledge holders and trying to learn from them about how to apply this kind of practice. And ultimately, compassion is about self-awareness and personal accountability. What are you doing to either move towards a more compassionate world that you live in terms of your communication practice, and what are you doing to move away from it? Are you inadvertently entering into office gossip that isn't helpful? Or little tiny things can make a difference to how you build a compassionate culture. Kristen Neff, Sharon Salzberg, there's a whole lot of practitioners that really, there's a lot of research out there on this. It's very much the basis of a lot of Brené Brown's work in brave leadership and vulnerability. So that's something you might want to look up. And to sort of get us to the pointy end, excuse my typo, building a culture of kindness looks like a place where people are more connected, they're accepting of one another, there's an absolute non-negotiable standard of respect, and we're engaging meaningfully with others. And I'm just going to draw your attention to a book by Hugh Mackay, The Kindness Revolution, How We Can Restore Hope, Rebuild Trust and Inspire Optimism. I read this in 2021, and I have to say it was one of those books that kind of shifted my mindset significantly, because to see in a documented a process where where Hugh was actually putting a premise out there that we could live a better life, we could all be richer for a world where we actually put kindness first. So we're more collaborative, that we're more accepting and more accepting of ourselves as well. So honouring boundaries, but using our skills for good, not evil. So the toolkit for interpersonal skill development looks like things like building mindfulness meditation practices to train the brain to be more responsive and less reactive. It looks like building compassionate leadership and modeling the skills and cultivating the cultures that we want to see in our profession. And thirdly, it's thinking about valuing those skills. So rewarding and measuring these kind of skills in professional development moving forward. So where to from here? I'm suggesting that this is a unique opportunity for our profession or our field to lead the kindness revolution more broadly, to embed cultures and professional standards that recognise and reward skills, knowledge and attributes that contribute positively to society. So while we're becoming so much more technically skilled and able to adapt to those environments, we're also considering our humanness and how we value, reward and acknowledge the development of the skills that make us better humans overall, and therefore better communicators, and lead stronger businesses, have stronger communities, and hopefully more hopeful and bright futures. Some of those, and make a contribution to those big issues in the world that we know we want to be part of. So thank you very much for your time and patience and listening. And I'm going to throw it back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Victoria. That was great. And so much in there. You've got so much detail. I'm very conscious of time. I'd love to kind of facilitate a good discussion because you've raised so many good points. There's lots of chat in the Q&A around, you know, just bringing a lot of this together for people, right? There's obviously a lot of kind of different resources out there, and this kind of discussion has been a great way to kind of bring it all together. I'll ask a couple of quick questions in the couple of minutes we have left.
Please do.
I think, you know, you talked about early on a post-pandemic world. Do you think there's an opportunity now for this kindness revolution really to take hold because of the pandemic? I mean, it feels like these aren't necessarily new concepts, right? But perhaps we all appreciate the small things a bit more now. So do you think like now is a almost once in a generation time to be able to take advantage of that?
Absolutely. And that was, yeah, 100%. It's just the right time to do something, to have these conversations, to use this language and not feel too icky about it. I guess if I would not have said I'd be presenting this type of topic 5 years ago, even maybe 10 years ago, definitely not. So I think everything's shifted so much that why not have a conversation about kindness as leading our professional practice and see where that lands.
And as you were talking, I mean, you talked about the broad skill set of communication professionals, and there's a lot in there, right? And so we're kind of saying, add some more in, although I think you wrapped it up nicely, which was just be a good human. That's a kind of nice way to think about it. What do you say to, you know, if you think about the skills at work, if you can't do something, you get training for that, or you get, you know, I guess reprimanded or whatever. But if you don't have these skills, there's no downside to that, right? Like, what do you do for those who just say, no, I don't need these skills and I can do it without, you know, having to focus on that? I'm focused on the hard skills.
We all have worked around
yeah.
difficult people who are constantly not only not reprimanded, they're generally rewarded for bad behavior. They're often the leaders we've had to deal with for the last 20 years, 30 years of our careers. So I think wouldn't it be great if there was that sort of, that's, I guess, criteria for evaluating success? What did you do that actually contributed to a positive workplace, you know, tangibly? Are you kind of person that people want in their team because you bring an attitude of can-do and positivity? Do you shout your colleagues coffee every now and then? You know, do you really show up for clients and, you know, really put you know, have great conversations with them that pushes them, but also that is respectful? It's kind of, how do you reward that beyond, how do you embed that as a value? I think it's really a conversation, you know, to take further, and I don't want to hold anybody up too much, but I think it's something we could make tangible if we wanted to. And like we do with anything, success is valued on more than money and status. And I think that's what the post-pandemic world has taught us, is that actually these skills are highly valuable, but most importantly, critical for business.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Victoria. I think everyone's really appreciated that. There's a nice kind of comment in here from Annette Holden who says, you know, it's refreshing to hear someone speak about these topics of kindness, hope, and human qualities. And there, that's what sets us apart from AI. I was happy to hear up front that you said you're a human. I wasn't sure if you're a ChatGPT or an AI bot, but
you know, I've got an identical twin sister, so she could have easily slotted in here and been present. I mean, this could be a whole figment of your imagination. You never know.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I think a number of people are going to follow up with you directly, and I'm sure you'll be keen to
please
continue
do
the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Sorry I went a bit over. There's so much to think about. It really, obviously, you can see I'm a bit excited. So I look forward to catching up with everybody. Thank you very much for your attention to today. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, Paul.